Hello, boys and girls. All right, we're going to continue reading Charlotte's Web. Yesterday we read chapters 8 and 9, and Wilbur was attempting to try to make a spider web of his own, and he soon discovered that he was not able to because he's not a spider, he's a pig, isn't he? And then chapter 10 is one of my favorite ones, and it's called An Explosion. So there's going to be some kind of explosion that happens in this chapter. I'm going to show you the first picture before I start to read. Oh, there it is. And there's Charlotte and her web. And as we know, when she catches flies, she often has to repair her web or put some of the pieces back together from where the little insects fly into her web, and then she wraps them up. So there she is, repairing her web and getting ready for her day. Okay? And she had told Wilbur that she was thinking about a plan. She was figuring out a plan to save his life. So let's see what she comes up with and what happens with the explosion. So this is chapter 10. Day after day, the spider waited, head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur she would save his life, determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. Hey, there's our fruit of the spirit this month, isn't it? So spiders are very patient. She knew from experience if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web. And she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, an idea came. How perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Mr. Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as insects. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking, said the spider, that people are very gullible. What does that mean? That means easy to trick or fool, said Charlotte. Well, that's a mercy, replied Wilbur, and he lay down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone, so she knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery wandered into Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery had a live frog in his hand, and Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen, just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for pie. Ooh, take that thing out of here, said Mrs. Zuckerman. He's hot, said Fern. He's almost dead, that frog. He is not, said Avery. He lets me scratch him between the eyes. The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting your pie on you, said Fern. Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is all over his front. Come on, frog, cried Avery, and he scooped up his frog. The frog kicked, splashing soapy water onto the pie. Ugh, yuck, said Fern. Let's swing on the swing, said Avery, and the children ran out to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the county. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over their north doorway in the barn. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft, and then holding the rope, you stood on the edge and looked down. Then you straddled the knot so it acted like a seat. Oh, and then when you got up the nerve, you took a deep breath and jumped. For a second, you seemed like you were falling to the barn floor, but suddenly the rope would catch you and you would sail through the barn door, going a mile a minute, the wind whistling in your eyes and ears and hair. Then you would zoom up toward the sky and look up at the clouds. Then the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope. Then you would go down, down, down out of the sky, and back and forth until you slowed down, and then you would jump off and let somebody else try. Mothers for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared that somebody might fall off, but no one ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed up to the hayloft. The last time I swang on this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow, he yelled. Take that frog out, ordered Fern. Avery straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all, and into the sky, and then back into the barn. Your tongue is purple, screamed Fern. So is yours, cried Avery, sailing out again with the frog. I have hay inside my dress, she said. It itches. Well, scratch it, he yelled as she sailed back. It's my turn. Jump off. Fern's got the itch, sang Avery. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes tightly and jumped. She felt the dizzy drop and then the lift of the swing. When she opened her eyes, she was looking up at the blue sky and was about to fly back through the door. Oh, here's a picture. Look how fun that is. There they are. Okay, do you see Avery way up here? Right, that's where you start, and you get on the swing and you jump off and you swing all the way out through the door and then all the way back again and back and forth until you slow down. So there's Fern giving it a try. Super fun, huh? When the children grew tired of swinging, they went down towards the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside of it, and she got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog in it. The frog seemed tired after all the morning swinging. The children walked slowly toward the barn. They too were tired and hardly had any energy to walk. Let's build a tree house, said Avery. I want to live in a tree with my frog. I'm going to go visit Wilbur, Fern announced. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily toward the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. Avery noticed the spider web, and then going closer, he saw Charlotte. Hey, look at that big spider, he said. It's tremendous. Leave it alone, said Fern. You've got a frog, isn't that enough? That's a fine spider, and I'm going to capture it, said Avery. He took the cover off of his candy box, then he picked up a stick. I'm going to knock that old spider into this box, he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded in catching her. You stop it, Avery, cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed on the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up and then came down with a slap. And underneath it was the goose egg. There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and then a horrible smell. All right, here's the picture. All right, so he climbed up, right? Tried to climb over the fence, and he stepped on the edge of the trough and fell. And then see the egg under there? See Templeton going into the hole? Right? So this was the old egg that never hatched, and so the goose is the egg he gave to Templeton. And when the eggs are rotten like that and they explode, oh, really bad smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gases and smells from the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. Oh, good night, said Avery. What a stink! Let's get out of here. Fern was crying, and she held her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose, too. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. It had been a narrow escape. Later that morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again of how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte, and how the smell of the broken egg drove him away just in time. It was that rotten egg that saved Charlotte's life, said Wilbur. Well, the goose was very proud of her share in this adventure. Well, I'm just delighted then that egg never hatched, she gabbled. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg. But he couldn't resist boasting. It pays to save things, he said in his surly voice. A rat never knows when something's going to come in handy. I never throw anything away. Well, said one of the lambs, this whole business is all good and well for Charlotte. But what about the rest of us? Ooh, that smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that is perfumed with rotten egg? Don't worry, you'll get used to it, said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely at his long whiskers, then crept away, to pay a visit to the garbage dump. When Lurvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short a few paces from the pig pen, sniffed the air, and then made a face. "What in the thunder?" he said. Setting the pail down, he picked up the stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. "Ugh, rats," he said. "Phew! I might have known a rat would make a nest under this trough." And Lurvy dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, bearing the broken egg and all of Templeton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured, and the slops ran down around his eyes and his nose and his snout. He was so hungry he gobbled up everything in just a few small bites. He ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and Charlotte was trying to save his life, so he left a whole noodle for Templeton instead of a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared and the barn started to smell good again. The afternoon passed and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool and kindly breath of an evening entered through the doors and windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she stirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily while the other creatures drowsed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed that she was at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled a nightly song. Charlotte tore quite a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump around midnight, the spider was still hard at work. All right, that was chapter 10. Chapter 11, which we'll do next time, is called The Miracle. This is one of the best parts of the story, the miracle. So that will be chapter 11. So I will read that one next, boys and girls. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 10, the explosion. Ooh, that yucky rotten egg. I can imagine how bad that would smell, huh? So, all right. And then next time we'll do chapter 11, the miracle. So, all right. Have a good day, boys and girls. Bye.